Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Hey, well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This is your late Tuesday night edition with Parker and Drew. It is really good to see you guys. Drew, how are you?
Great to be back. I'll always love to be on here in front of the camera whenever I can. I'm especially excited for tonight. I've been waiting on this episode for weeks. I got some flags to plant. I'm ready to get grilled for this list. I'm so ready to go.
Oh, geez, buddy. This is going to be an event.
Parker mumbling things under his breath as we are.
I'm scared. I'm scared, Jim. I'm scared.
Oh, well, the good news is that, first of all, you're a much larger human than me. So even if we were in the same room, you would have nothing about me to be scared of.
Damn.
But the good news is you're protected by your camera. I'm not going to be able to reach through and poke you. The most I can do is just laugh at you on the air.
The camera in the distance is the only thing keeping my take safe nowadays, you know.
So this is our second podcast of the night on offensive linemen. And the task that was given to Drew and Parker was to cover all offensive linemen that they have graded round 5 or better. Okay, and we have different grading scales, but round 5 or better could develop into an NFL starter or better. I know that there might be some interpretation of that, but Drew, you had one center, so we didn't make a list. Who is the one center? Who is the one center that you had?
This is really, really strange center class. This feels so wrong to just not even have a graphic because I have one player in my top 175 at that position. And technically, Drew Kendall from Boston College is at like the very latest 5th round grade you can get from me. But I'd imagine he doesn't stay there by the time I'm all said and done. My one center is Jared Wilson. He's got a mid-second round grade right now. Exactly, Bill. We're grinding right now. So my one center is Jared Wilson. I think he's the lone light in this dreadful center class. He's a great athlete. He moves so well, so fluently. He's got pretty good anchor for being as small as he is too. Well, I say small relatively, but he's great athlete. Probably my favorite thing about him is he's a heat-seeking missile to second-level defenders. It's like he's got a GPS in his head running all the time to exactly where these guys are at all times on the field. DBs, hell, even third-level defenders when he gets up there. He doesn't miss on guys in the open field. Pretty solid punch, pretty solid power for a smaller frame guy who's mainly an athlete. He's not going to be, a big body guy in the middle. Strong lower halves, got great grip strength. Pretty technically advanced hands too. He's one of the better snatch trappers in this whole class, which is saying a lot because there's some good hand fighters in this class. But yeah, I think Jared Wilson is should be a day 2 pick, probably early on that side, if you ask me, just because of how dry this center class is. And I think he's an immediate starter.
Yeah, and Parker, you want to talk about your centers?
Yeah, I got to know what the beef is with Jake Majors first and foremost, because that guy is a dog. What are we doing here? We're already starting off on the wrong foot, Drew.
I guess so. I didn't realize the centers were going to be the cause of conflict on this episode. I knew there was going to be some. I didn't think it was going to be the centers. I like Majors. And maybe it's just I need to watch more because I admittedly I didn't spend a whole lot of time on anybody else after the first game or two because I just didn't love what I saw. But I just a little bit more power from Majors. Again, maybe I watched the wrong games. I need to watch some more of that guy. But I didn't see anything that blew me away.
Yeah, I think as far as all of the Texas guys that are noteworthy offensive linemen in this class, as far as, Banks, Majors, and Williams, I think I kind of have them I'm more middling on them than a lot of people. Like I'm not as low on a couple of them as a lot of people are. I'm not as high on, 1 or 2 of them as a couple of people are. I have them all kind of like squished a lot closer together on my board. And Jake Majors, I think for me, it was the consistency on film. Like he wasn't ever throwing out like big level, like flashy plays or anything crazy exciting. But I just, again, I talked about it before with your center, you want to know what you're getting from a down to down perspective. And with him, I felt like I knew what I was getting out of him. And for me, that's almost enough in a class like this to bring a guy up onto day 2, out of day 3, just because there's so much, I think, inconsistency with players in this class, and then you have that paired with guys moving positions, where I feel like Jake Majors is going to transition to the league, and he's going to be who you think he's going to be. Ceiling might be limited, but I think in a weaker center class, you're looking for the consistent guy that can have a decent floor, and that's Jake Majors for me. I agree with a lot of what you said about Jared Wilson. I think he's a really fun player. I just think he doesn't do a great job staying square. And for me, I need my center to stay square, especially in protection. He gets a little eager to jump from, assignment to assignment, especially when he's uncovered in pass protection. And that worries me. I feel like he's a guy that's a prime candidate to get, picked and stuns and miss some of these, delayed on coffee house looks. And you can just struggle in those areas. But I like both the guys. I think they're both second round guys, or at least late second round guys for me. Really excited about what they put on tape, but then I have a pretty significant drop off to McLaughlin. I don't know if you want to comment on anything.
As an Alabama fan, not particularly. I'm not sure I have too many nice thoughts after last season, or season before last now, I should say. But yeah, I think I've got a 7 on McLaughlin, a 6 on Monheim, and a 6 on Majors right now. And I did not watch Connor Pay, so I can't speak to him too much. But yeah, I don't have too many nice thoughts, so I should probably just leave it to you on the rest of the center class. And I'll gear up for the rest.
Well, this is a good warm-up because the next lists are going to be a lot better. But the centers were the first graphic I made, so that's why they were listed.
No, I think it's great, and I think the important conversation to have, I think, with the centers, and I'll talk about McLaughlin, Monheim, and Pay in a second, but there's a lot of people projecting a lot of guys to play center, and a lot of those guys I have as guards. I don't think they're going to convert well to center. I haven't seen this, like kind of like what I talked about with the Senior Bowl stuff, where I haven't seen them do center well enough when they've gotten the opportunity. Not saying they can't turn into that, but like I was talking to Drew about pre-show, I've tried to keep these guys where I feel like they fit best. So I'm not saying they're exclusive to this position or this is all they can do. It's just I project them best at whatever position they landed on my board, and that's kind of important as we get to these other positions as well. But as far as McLaughlin goes, I'm a fan of what he does. I think he's inconsistent. Like I have day 3 grades on the last 3 guys on this list, and they're kind of spread out, so I wouldn't say they're relatively close either. But yeah, like I said, McLaughlin is just an inconsistency thing for me. I feel like the highs are really good. Like you feel good about what he puts on film as if you pull up like a highlight tape of him, but the lows are also just so deep where it's like, again, I don't know down to down what I'm going to get from you. And he's going to take a lot of, I think, technical refinement. I think there's a lot of his mentality that's good. There's a lot of the traits that you can like with him, but it's just the foundation technically is very weak in my opinion. So that's going to slide him down. He's just more of a project guy. Jonah Monheim has been a guy that's been up and down my board. Again, extremely inconsistent. But he's kind of the inverse where he has, I think, the technical foundation. Like his technique looks solid. He just struggles as far as the traits. Like, he's not a highly athletic guy. He's not going to test well. He's not a guy that just is a nasty finisher, a nasty player on the interior. He's just kind of a lukewarm, technically sound center, which there's nothing wrong with. But again, another guy I wouldn't take until day 3. And then I had to shout out the local kid, played local high schools, stayed at BYU. And that's not why I'm high on him, but I just think he's really solid. I think I like what he can do with his lower body. I think he's got a nice anchor. Where he struggles is hand fighting and flexibility. I feel like, again, on stunts, he's the pick guy. He's the guy you're gonna be able to trap with certain looks. And he's gonna bite on certain looks as well. But overall, I think the biggest thing in his game was his anchor and pass protection, but he just struggled to move guys in the run game. But I like the upside he has as a pass protector. I think he can be really consistent at that spot. He just needs to really take a leap, it feels like, at times in the run game. But I think he's the lowest offensive lineman I have rated out of this group that we're going to talk about today, if I remember right. But I still have him in the 5th, just more back end of the 5th, and I can see him sliding further than that, even if it's UDFA. But I take him in the 5th personally.
Cool. And now we are going to look.
Here we go.
Guard list.
This is the meat and potatoes right here.
This is interesting because this is the first time I've seen the graphics side by side, and I just realized that you have the top 3 guys identical. So Drew's list is on the left, and Parker's list, clearly with Parker's name on it, is on the right, in case that was not obvious to anybody looking at the screen. But Drew, you want to highlight why you have Tyler Booker as guard 1?
Yeah, and I don't want to steal Parker's thunder too much here, because I know he's a little bit earlier on Booker than I was. But first of all, great minds think alike. That's what they say. Top 3 being the same. I'm not surprised about that at all. Booker, yeah, he's so. I feel like he's right up there with like Emeka Egbuka is probably the safest pick in this whole draft, where you can pencil a guy in as a decade-long starter. Booker is going to come into an offense day 1 and be an immediate contributor in pass protection. He's going to be, like I said, a day 1 starter. He's so strong. He's got an immovable anchor. He's just a vacuum for any power rushers. They're not going to move him an inch. He's super technically advanced with his hands in pass protection. Probably the most of any guard I've watched in a long time. He's vice grips for hands too. He gets his hands on you and you're done. Your rep is over. He's such a strong lower half too. He just like I said, the anchor. He never moves in pass protection. I think my main gripes with him are as a run blocker. I think he can be kind of off balance sometimes. I think that's the place he has the most room to improve. But again, if I'm drafting a guy in the 1st round like Booker as a guard, the pass protection is what I'm loving there. You can work as a run guy. And also the main thing that I can't get with him is a puller. He pulls like he has a blindfold on. I don't understand what the disconnect is there. But it's like he closes his eyes when he pulls, and he's just kind of flailing his arms around. And I don't think I saw him connect on a single pull on any of the tape that I watched. And Ryan, I had Marcus Ware on my list, and I took him off right before because I didn't feel like I could watch enough. I had 1 game of Montana State, and I didn't feel like I could include the list if I didn't watch as many games. But he had an awesome Shrine Bowl, and I did like the 1 game I watched, so he probably should be on this list if I can get my hands on more film. But
so, Parker, you have Booker at number 1, Donovan Jackson is number 2. You want to talk about why you have both of them at 1, 2?
Yeah, no, I think Drew hit the nail on the head with Booker. Not much to add there. His biggest flaw, what people complain about, is the stuff in the run game. But I think, like Drew said, he's got a workable profile there. But the floor as a pass protector, I think, is safer than any floor in this draft. I think player-wise, I think you know what you're going to get day 1 from Booker as a pass protector. The run game concerns are what they are. I think the way the NFL's gone with run schemes nowadays, it's kind of easy to slot a guy in. I think you can figure out he has the play strength, he has the athleticism, he has all of the traits to fit there. I don't honestly, like Drew said, it's kind of baffling to see why he struggles, because I think he's great at the first level, but once he gets on the move or gets in space, it seems to fall apart for him. I think it's just a patience thing. I think he gets too eager to climb or too eager to get out in space where he can overrun things. And I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's just like when you're grading out the games, even as a coach, like you're grading that out. It's like, I like to see something better from you here. You're kind of missing certain things. I think it's easily coachable in an off season. And like I talked about before, I think, when you have issues, when you look at certain players, for me, when you look at it and say, I can fix that in an off season, I don't generally consider that too much of a concern. It's obviously a concern you need to fix it, but if I can correct it before he hits the field in year one, then I'm not going to really have that on my short list of red flags. That's why I think Booker's one of the safer picks in this draft, especially top 40. Donovan Jackson, his flex potential that he showed most of the season, I guess, at tackle is why he's high on my guard list, which is kind of funny to say. But I already thought he was a solid guard. I just kind of thought, he was a higher floor, lower ceiling guard. But then seeing him flex out gets you excited for what he's able to do at both positions and what he's able to provide a team. And that's why he jumped Will Campbell for me. Donovan, I just think, has a solid floor at both spots. He might have a higher ceiling as a guard, which isn't saying much because I think he's got a pretty low ceiling. But I think he's a guy that's going to end up sticking around on a roster or at least be on teams throughout for a long time as a journeyman, because I think he'd be an invaluable, sixth man. I think he could be a swing tackle for you. I think he could be a guard tackle flex for you. He could be a swing guard for you. I really do see him as a four-position player, and I think he raised his stock a lot by having to transition out in lieu of Josh Simmons this season. So props to him.
Yeah. And Drew, you want to highlight Donovan Jackson and Will Campbell?
Yes, for sure. Now, was that Bill that just asked that question about us grading them on that versatility?
That was, yes.
So for me, I actually don't have versatility is not included in my grading scale at all. I graded him separately as a tackle and a guard, and they ended up right next to each other as late firsts at both. And the tackle tape, I have a hard time because it's you're going off of what four games, is that what it was? Like pretty much just that playoff run, but he was so incredibly clean. Are the foot speed issues there at tackle? Probably, yeah. But he was going up against RJ Oben against Notre Dame, and he was facing like NFL edges on a routine basis in these games,
and he was hanging up.
Give up, yeah, he didn't give up the outside corner or the outside shoulder, barely at all. Maybe once or twice in the Tennessee game, but I thought he fared extremely well, even in spite of the foot speed concerns. He's so powerful, especially on down blocks. I think he has a bad habit of lowering his head and lunging into any contact, which is an infuriating habit of 99% of this offensive line class. I feel like I saw that in every single prospect I watched. So I'm not trying to call him specifically out on that. Everybody did it in this class. But he's so strong. Another guy that just immovable anchor. I think this is the true let him fail inside guy in this class rather than Will Campbell. I think Donovan Jackson has starting tackle potential. But even if, maybe he can't fare to NFL speed, I think you kick him inside and he's probably a better guard. I love Donovan Jackson at both positions. Will Campbell is another one of the ones I felt like I had to be so contrarian with to everybody in this draft process. And I don't understand it with Will Campbell. The talk about him at 4th overall to the Patriots seems kind of insane to me. I would never try him at tackle, first of all. I have a hard time seeing people go there. And that's not even an arm length thing. Is the arm length going to be a problem? Probably, yeah.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, for sure.
It's hysterical, right? Because we had an offensive line podcast at 8:30, and they're like, Will Campbell at 4 overall. And then we have another offensive line podcast, and you guys are like, can't see Will Campbell at 4.
That's a really tough one for me. And I'm not trying to take shots at anybody else. I totally respect everybody at the draft professor as evaluators. I'm sure that everybody has their values and their thought process. So I'd be interested to hear why they think that. But that's a tough one for me to sell. I think he's extremely limited as an athlete on top of the arm length concerns, which is a recipe for disaster at tackle. I think he's got a weaker lower half, which can be improved on, but he's got a problem there. He's pretty solid run blocker, but I just, the torque is there, but he really, really worries me. Like I said, in terms of athleticism, the punch and the grip strength is great. He's technically sound. He's a strong player, but I just, he's technically sound, but he's just so athletically limited that I don't think you can ever try him at tackle. I think he's going to be a really solid long-time starter at guard, though.
Okay, so Parker, you can comment on Will Campbell as you need to, and then you have Jalen Rivers at 4 at guard. So talk about Campbell a little bit, and then Rivers.
Yeah, no, I'm really in the same boat with Drew. I've said it since the summer. I've never seen top 5 prospect Will Campbell film. He doesn't have, and even in a weak class, stacking him up, he's not a first round guy compared to tackles we've seen in the past as far as just film goes, right? Like ignoring what they've done or what we think they'll do at the next level. Will Campbell never had film that stacked up with guys that we've seen go. Like, just go watch Charles Cross, who's a very meh tackle in the NFL right now, and then go watch Will Campbell. And you're going to be like, oh, wow, no, this guy's league's better. And Charles Cross was a legitimate, I think he was at least a top 10 guy. He might have been or slightly earlier than that or close to top 5
yeah,
guy.
you're accurate. Yep.
Yeah, in the draft. And so it's like, you go watch that guy and then go watch Will Campbell and then tell me that Will Campbell's a top 5 prospect. That's all I have on that topic, just because. And there's other tackles in this class that I'll say the same thing with, where if you go watch other guys in previous classes, and like I do that as a primer every time I go into, my summer scouting, especially when I go in to do my rechecks in the season, when you've been watching a lot of college football. I've been watching a lot of high school football, coaching. Every time I go to do my rechecks in the fall, I spend like a day or a weekend watching some of my favorite prospects from years past, no matter how they turned out in the league. And then I always pull up a few guys that are top guys in the league that I might have missed on or I just didn't watch back then. I just go see what their film looks like, and then I jump into that position group. I do that by position, because I think it's important to kind of like restructure your viewing experience to like the level you should be watching from, because I work with 16, 17, 18-year-olds all week, and then watch college football on Saturday. I'm going to go and start watching these college prospects and be like, oh wow, this guy's amazing. But that's really not always the case. But that's where I'm at with Will Campbell. I think if you go stack him up with other top 5 tackles, you'll understand why I don't see him as a top 5 tackle. But realistically, watching his film, like the base is fine, but he gets peeled open, especially on inside moves so often in pass protection. Mm-hmm. It's a concern, especially at left tackle, but let alone just the tackle position in general. Like, he doesn't have a good anchor, in my opinion, I think. And then again, like I said, he gets peeled open on inside moves. And so when you see guys that get peeled open like that, then you want to see them have the strength to redirect guys across the line. Whereas I think Will Campbell, as one of the things I love most about Donovan Jackson, but their understanding of leverage and just like, keep my body between quarterback and defender. I think a lot of people can fall in love with that. Like, oh yeah, he's always in between the defender and the quarterback, but that doesn't matter when it's defender, you, and then the quarterback right behind you. That's still a bad rep. Even though you're in between the defender and the quarterback, like, you're doing your job, that's not a win in my book. That's kind of where I struggle with him, where I just feel like he's got really loose hips. I feel like he's got a weak base. Like Drew said, the punch is fine. I think he's got good upper body strength. He keeps his head out of blocks, which I enjoy a lot. I think he's a great people mover in the run game. I think he succeeds at the second level. He's very patient at the second level in the run game. That's why I like him as a guard. I think he's going to be a very good guard at the next level. I don't see any level of success, which sounds hyperbolic and dramatic, but I don't see him having success as a tackle in the next level. I just think the bend's going to destroy him, because I think he shortens that corner a lot and does a good job of just, again, maintaining that leverage and forcing guys around the hoop, which is fine. But guys are going to learn that they can show speed on the outside and counter either with power or just with an inside move, and they're going to be able to open him up and win reps. And that's going to really, he's a guy that if he just goes in as a tackle only, he's going to get a lot of hate coming out of camp. Maybe not from the media, but just in general, just because I don't know if he's going to even succeed there. But Jalen Rivers is a guy that I need Drew to get hip to, apparently.
Listen, I thought I was high on Rivers. I like Rivers.
It was funny because I didn't realize.
That's actually, first of all, that's a fair take or fair comeback, Drew, because I will definitely say both of you have Rivers, I think, higher than this is not the first offensive line show we've done. Okay. I think both of you are higher on Rivers than I've seen others. But Parker, you've got a flag there. So plant.
Flag. I've been higher on Rivers than most everybody I've seen, except for Parker, I guess.
I just even when I was putting this list together, I was like, because I added him a little later. I don't know, I was kind of reorganizing it, but I was like, oh no, I like him better than so and so. Oh no, I like him better than, and he just kept climbing the board.
Yeah.
And my grade for him is kind of just solid, but again, another guy where I think he's got true, again, 4-position flex. I know a lot of people talk about him as a center. I just would need to see him do it before I can truly say how I feel about that. But I think starting out day one, he's another guy that can go 4 positions. He can play both sides of the ball. He can play tackle and guard. I think he's a little less. What's the word? He's not going to be as good of a tackle. But I think that's kind of clear by his film. But when we bump him inside, I think you have a high level guard. The only reason he's down at 4 on my guard list and not 8 is because I just worry about his floor. I think he could really be a boom or bust type player coming into camp. I think if he gets into the league and settles in relatively early, like some of the top level guys do, or if he gets into a situation where he's able to, he might be a day one starter for a bad team, but if he gets into a situation where he's able to get to a good group with a good coach, maybe some veteran experience, I think we could see a very like kind of Steve Avila path for him, where he becomes a day one starter, but you just see him improve week over week, and then by the end of the season, you're like, oh yeah, no, this guy was clearly one of the better prospects in the draft, though he might not come out being that guy. I think, come November, December, January, I think we're going to be fans of what he's doing. I'd love to see him land in like a San Francisco or like a Seattle. I think he's a great fit for those teams, and I think those are ideal situations for him to come in, have a significant day one impact, but then be able to grow throughout the course of an offseason and a season. I just really, again, worried about that floor, but his ceiling might be one of the highest of this guard class, just because, again, the flexibility is great, but what he's able to do on a down-to-down basis and what the flashes that he shows on his college tape, it's like, dude, I love watching this guy's film. I think he's a mauler. I think he's got that mentality that I love out of my offensive lineman. I think he's got ways to go on certain technical things in his game, but overall, I like what he brings, and I think he's going to be able to get in with an NFL coach and even an offseason trainer and really clean up a lot of his game and show that he can be a very solid prospect at the next level.
Okay, and Drew, you've got Gray Zabel as your 4th guard. So what do you like about Zabel?
Yeah, and as far as Rivers too, like that, he's pretty much interchangeable with those LSU guys, so he could end up even higher. But yeah, I thought I was low on Zabel too. I'm not nearly as low on Zabel as Parker is. But Zabel, I don't see the first round player that everybody immediately jumped to post Senior Bowl. I think my main gripe with him is he plays standing straight as a board. There's 0 pad level with Zabel. The minute he gets in against a 6'2" NFL defensive tackle, they're going to put a hole through his chest and they're going to get underneath him, and he's going to end up in his quarterback's lap. He's got to fix the pad level. He's strong as hell. I mean, I'll give him that. He's strong as an ox. The hands are strong. He's got technically pretty good hand fighter. I mean, he's got one of the better snatch straps in this class. But he's a hugger too, which another thing that is all over this class, and it pisses me off. His hands are so wide. They're so far outside. He's got late hands. He walks that tightrope between late and patient hands. And I lean more towards late. And that's part of why he ends up as a hugger, just because he lets guys into his frame. And he's got a good anchor, but you're testing that a lot when you're going to let guys routinely into your frame. And NFL guys are a lot better than who he was playing at North Dakota State. So if you let an NFL like a Jared Verse into your frame, doesn't matter how good an anchor is, if you just let him get a free rush into your chest, it's going to end poorly. He's a strong mover in the run game. I think there's at least a floor there as a run defender because he's so strong lower body. I have a hard time projecting him to center. I don't really see that like a lot of people do. I've got a late second on Zabel. I'm not super high on him. I think he's got a lot of things to fix before he can be a solid contributor, especially in pass protection. I think most of his issues come in pass pro, and he can be kind of a liability there at times. But I think he's one of the few true guard molds in this class that fits better, which is ironic because he played tackle. But that's about it for him. So
the 4th guard for you on your board, Drew, is late 2nd round. So where you're looking at Zabel, you're thinking it's a late round 2, top 64, top 75 type. Great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Parker, your next guard is Tate Ratledge.
Yeah, no, and I just touch on Zabel. The top 30 hype's insane to me. I know he's got limited reps there, but he's not a center. I think his lower half is too weak for that, personally. And not a crazy knock, but he doesn't have a great anchor. I think North Dakota State's got a great system going as far as we're going to get these tackles in that are going to project as great guards because they have bigger frames because they're tackles, but they're not the best pass protectors. They're not asked to pass protect, so it takes a long time. Speaking from experience as a Bengals fan, it takes a while for North Dakota State offensive linemen to these tackles to convert into good pass protectors even on the interior. But you're going to see these guards come in that are great, run blockers. They do a good job at the second level, but they just have, they have the late hands, they drop their heads, they play very tall. Like they all have the same deficiencies coming in, and they all have the same projection coming in. It's just about what the ceiling is as far as their draft stock. And so I think Drew did a great job talking about Zabel. I just had to get in. The top 30 hype's insane. Saying that he is going to play center day one for a team, I think, is also insane. Moving tackle to center is a huge leap. Moving from FCS football to the NFL is a huge leap. If you put him at center day one and leave him there, you're going to have a really rough 2 years, in my opinion, with that player. Now, not that he can't do it. Like I definitely think that he can. Anybody can at that level, as far as the NFL goes. But just you're going to really struggle for a couple of years. But Tate Radledge, I think, is my player who embodies this guard class, whether it's tackles flexing in, the true guards, like whoever you have on this list. Because I think he's a very good athlete. I think he tests well this week. We'll obviously see. I think he's there. I would assume he's there. But he's a great mover. I think he's built for a wide zone scheme. He's got kind of not the strongest punch. And like Drew said, he ducks his head a lot, but he's able to cut guys off, win the leverage battle. I think he does the same thing at the second level and out in space. Same issues, though, as, again, the majority of this class, where he's going to overrun stuff in space. He's going to get to the second level and, misjudge where linebackers are going to be. He's going to have those small deficiencies in his game. But overall, you like the clay that I feel like he is as far as what you're able to work with at the next level. I think he could even be a guy you could train to be a flex center. Obviously not a starting center, but I think you have him as like your 6th, 7th, 8th guy that's on your bench every Sunday. He's going to be a guy that could be a multi-positional guy for you after some time. Just because I think he has the athletic ceiling. Now, he's got to learn how to there's flashes on his film of some really fun natural play strength, but he doesn't know how to harness that, it feels like. Like, he's got it, but he tries to be more athlete than brute, I think, a lot of times, and that's what gets him into trouble, is he tries to out-athlete defensive linemen and linebackers, and there's times where he's just not able to do that. Though I think he's a good athlete, there's times where it would just serve him better to be a power player, and he doesn't really seem to know when to turn that gear on or switch his attack for certain defenders. But again, I think that's something that you maybe not coach up and correct all the way in a season, but I think that's something you can get to day one of the season, have him be active on your bench as an NFL team and feel confident that he's going to be able to go out onto the field if need be and perform at a high level. But that's why I have him in that, later day 3 range, just because I think he goes earlier than my famous, 4th round. You have traits but aren't very good bucket. I think he's better than that tier of player. But I don't think he's far off from that, just because I do think he has a lot of fun technical things that he does. I think he's a good hand fighter. But mostly what excites me about him is his traits and what he's been able to put on tape as far as being an athlete. I think he's a little bit more of a project than I'd like out of a round 3 guy, but in a class like this, I think that's where he lands.
Okay. And then Drew, Wyatt Milam from West Virginia is your 5th guard. So what do you like about him?
Yeah, Milam was another kind of frustrating watch because I think he's one of the higher ceiling guys on this guard list. He's a good athlete. At least he has the potential to be. I think he's got the same, foot speed and pocket range issues that all these tackles kicking inside do. But I think as far as straight line athleticism goes, he's better than a lot of guys on this list. I think he's strong too, upper and lower body. He's got a lot of muscle, which is why it's so frustrating that he uses his head as a battering ram every single rep. And I don't understand why. These guys are going to end up with neck injuries before the end of their rookie contract because every single one of them wants to initiate contact with the crown of their head down. And not only do I hate it from a safety perspective, you constantly get push-pulled. You constantly get swim moves as a problem. You just flat out whiff half the time on second-level blocks because you're trying to dip your head into a linebacker. But, I think he's another guy that's a pretty good hand user. He's a good hand fighter. He's got a couple snatch traps on his tape, too, that are nice. He had a couple reps against ACC guys, not the strongest guys in the world. But when these lanky rushers will expose their chest on an inside counter trying to cross his face, he'll blast them about 7 yards. So he's got a powerful punch. I think he's got, like I said, the pocket range issues. This is more tackle is going to be masked when he kicks inside. but he's got to really sell out against speed, and he doesn't mirror very well. But I think there's athleticism to tap into there. So he's got a good blend of power and athleticism. He's got a nice frame, good enough hands, solid foundation to build off of. I think if you can break him of some of his bad habits and tap into some of that athleticism he has, he could be a high-end starter at guard for a pretty long time.
Okay, and then Parker, your next guard was Emory Jones from LSU.
Yeah, no, talking about tackles moving in, I think it's a great point. The reason, and there's a lot of people that pick a lot of different reasons to do this, but for me, when I'm bumping a tackle inside, it's range issues because you can totally mask that as a guard. It's not a length thing, it's not a height thing, it's not a weight thing. It's not like it's mostly for me. It's an athleticism thing or a range issue, and those 100%. Can go hand in hand or can be separately. Because if you have short arms and are a limited athlete, you're going to have range issues. If you have long arms but are a limited athlete, you might have less range issues. But if your feet can't get there, you're just a holding liability now. So I only move those guys inside. I'm not opposed to having a guard with longer arms. I think that's awesome if you can use them the right way. But kind of Emory Jones and Wyatt Milam, I think you and I see as the same player. Where I just worry. I think to start off, I think we're at the point now on my list where from 5 down on my list, I wish I could see all of these guys get reps against Aeneas Peebles because I think they all have issues as far as I'm going to duck into this guy and just try to out.
And I think Aeneas Peebles kicks every one of their asses, to be honest with you.
And I think Aeneas Peebles really gets to work on a lot of these guys. And that's the thing that's funny because I think he's slotted later than some of these guards, but I think he's a lot more of a problem for the guys that are coming out in this guard class than even some of these high-end D tackles. But if you want good film, that's like not against a guy that has first, second round hype for a lot of people, but is going to give a lot of interior defensive linemen problems. Try and find film against Peebles because that's what he specializes in. I think he can get kind of beat. And I know this is not a D tackle podcast, but I think you can get kind of beat by some of these more physical guys that know how to keep their head out, know how to have patient hands, patient feet. That's what beats him. And I think a lot of these guys that we're going to start talking about now don't have those things. And that's really the only issue. I see a lot of them similarly. That's really one of the only issues you're going to see coming out of these guys into the next level is, are they going to be able to get their head out? Are they going to be able to have patient hands or initiate contact early enough, but tight, not wide, where they can win those battles early and shut them down? I think a lot of these guards lose late or lose early, but win late if they can. And Emory Jones is the perfect example of that, where he's got, I think, good hand placement when he's able to punch when he wants to punch. When Emory Jones is in a position where he can dictate the rush, dictate protection, dictate engagement in the run game, knows what's going on, can get the jump on a defender, he might be one of the best players in this class as far as guards go. But when he's, gets beat or gets a move that he doesn't expect, which this sounds very dumb, but I promise it makes sense. But when he gets the counters that he's not ready for or stuff that just counters what he's strong at, like his misses are bad. Like when he's getting beat, he's flopping around, he's reaching at guys, he's trying to grab guys late. Like his losses are really bad, but his wins, like he looks dominant at times. And that's, again, that variability I just don't feel comfortable with, and I have to slide him down. Again, I've always been a floor guy, always will be a floor guy, and I just think his floor is so low personally. And that's why I bump him into guard, because hopefully at guard you can hide a few of those deficiencies and just naturally make him a better player. I think he's got a higher floor as a guard, but he's got issues you have to work on him with. I think he's a slide side guard, so you want to put him, maybe next to the tackle you don't trust on an island. But I think he's great at working together with, obviously, his guards at LSU. But I think he's going to be great at working and handing off stunts. I think he does a great job of staying square. I think he does a great job of keeping his head on a swivel and identifying what's going on. He's able to identify exotic looks as a tackle. I think he does all of that really well. Like the mental stuff, I think, is there. But it feels like his mind moves faster than his feet, moves faster than his hands at times, and he just is very disjointed. And I think he's just, again, more of a project. I still think he's a day 2 guy. I think he goes a lot earlier than I would personally take him. I don't hate his game. I like his game. But if I'm looking at this from the perspective of a GM, and I always say if I'm looking at these prospects, it's like, hey, what's this guy going to do for me the first game of the season in September? I don't see this guy being on the field for that first game. I could see him potentially being on the sideline, being a top 8 guy, but I don't see him having an instant impact. I think teams are going to struggle on how they can use him. I think it's safe to say I see him like I saw Latham last year, almost like a Latham light, where I don't think he's got the heavy feet, but that's a good and bad thing. Like I don't think he anchors as well as Latham did, but he moves a lot better in the run game. But I think he's got a lot of the same deficiencies where it looks like he knows what he's supposed to be doing, but he just can't get his body there. That's why he slid down my board.
Yep.
Okay. And then, Drew, there's two players I'd like you to highlight. One is Miles Frazier, and the other is Luke Kandra, because those are two players that are not on Parker's list. And then I think everybody else on your list will be covered. So Miles Frazier, Luke Kandra.
Yes, and I'm sure Parker's going to hit on my main points about Jonah Savanea, but I'd love to follow that up too whenever he gets to him. But as far as Miles Frazier, and these are both guys we actually talked about on my first podcast with Parker as scouting reports. Miles Frazier is he's actually honestly the guy that I'm hoping the Titans go for the most at the beginning of day 3, because I think when you watch him, the thing that jumps out most is consistency. You get the same Miles Frazier on every rep of every game all the time. His short area burst is crazy for a guy that's not really athleticism is not really his game. He's not one of those like Steve Avila, like you mentioned earlier, type guards where you're just a pure mover, which is typically the type I go for. But Miles Frazier, he's a solid athlete. He's super strong. Like I said, super consistent. He's got technically sound hands. And you blink and he's at the next level, or the lateral quickness, you blink and he's sliding with guys. His feet are a lot quicker than most people give him credit for. I think he's got an extremely high floor because of those reasons. Just very technically sound. I don't know how high the ceiling is necessarily with Frazier. But I think that's a guy you draft to come in and be a day one starter. He's solid in both pass protection and the run game. And I just think that he's incredibly solid at everything, very well rounded. And then as far as Luke Kandra goes, Kandra, I flipped back and forth between a 5th and a 6th on him for a while. And I know some people have him like in the 3rd and like near their top 50s. And I can't quite get that high. Again, because I just really, really struggle with guys that are limited athletes. You better be really, really good or really, really strong, I should say, like Jalen Rivers, for example. If you're going to be a limited athlete, you better be Jalen Rivers for me to like you. Kandra,
I like that.
Yeah. It's just like he's, I don't think the hands are bad, but they're not good enough to make up for how limited he is. He's strong as hell. If he gets a hand on you, you're probably shut down. Big mover in the run game, a lot of anchor. But he's just like, he's never going to be able to mirror. He's never going to be able to keep up with speed. He can't track at second level if he can even get to the second level, like I said, with the athleticism concerns. So I think this guy could be, a potential contributor at some point just because he has the raw power. But I just really, really struggle to see a path where he can keep up with NFL speed at any point.
And then, Parker, you've got Savanea and Ursary. You are higher on Savanea than Drew. And then you also have Ursary on your guard list. So you want to talk
about I got a bone to pick with Savanea, tell you what.
Jonah Savanea out of Arizona. Play tackle, I think he's a guard. I think, again, it's really mostly range issues for me. I think he plays a great pad level. I think he's another very high floor guy. But he might have one of the lowest ceilings of this group that we're looking at on my list personally, purely because I think he's going to be who he is right now, day one for you in the NFL, but I think he's going to be the same player in 3 years. I don't see him really developing more out of what he's already doing. I think he feels very capped when you watch his game. There's small nuances in his game that you could correct, but I think he does a lot of the things well. They see a lot of prospects, offensive line prospects come out and struggle with, and they have to correct over their first few years. And that's, for me, what increases the ceiling, where it's like, oh, these are basic issues that you can correct. I don't think Savanea has a lot of glaring issues in his game, but then it's like, oh, well, why is your guard 7 then? Because I just don't think he's got a lot of ways to go. I think he's just kind of capped out. I think he's tapped out. I don't know what more you can add to his game outside of trying to make him a little more athletic. I think he's a fine mover. I just think the way he's built and the way he plays, he's just going to be a guy that's got a solid anchor for you. He's able to get to the next level, but you're not going to want to really throw him out on perimeter screens. I don't think he moves that well. I don't think he tracks that well on the perimeter. But as a run blocker, I think he's a very solid player. I think he can flex at the tackle for you. I think he's just one of those guys that's going to be on your bench. And I have him in the 4th rounder because I think I do like his profile. I like the traits. I think he's going to test well. I think he's a very naturally strong player. I think he's very technically refined. I just don't know if he's going to be much better than what he is today, by the end of his rookie deal. And that's why he slides into the 4th round for me, because I don't think he's a guy I'd hate to have on my team. I just don't think he's a guy I'd like to invest day 1 or 2 capital on, because I just don't really see him developing. So that's why he slid for me. I like what he's got going on, but I'm sure Drew's going to hit on it because I think he puts those things a little bit better than I do. But the issues that he has, I just don't see him correcting greatly. I don't see them really changing for him. I think it's just they come with the style of football that he plays.
Yeah, and as far as Savainea, is that how you say it? I want to
Savainea.
Okay, there we go. I really, really don't like labeling guys as low effort or low motor because I don't know these guys as people. I don't get to sit down with them in an interview. So I think it's kind of dangerous and just flat out disrespectful to label guys as that way. But if I was going to do it off of anyone's tape, it's his. In a class full of guys who don't finish their run blocks, which again, another issue that really, really irks me and plagues this class, he takes the cake by a mile. He'll just flat out quit almost at the engagement point, along with his feet. His feet go dead at contact. I think Parker framed a lot of his pros well, probably nicer than I could have. But I think he's just such a limited athlete. And I think that the reason he knocked down the farthest for me is just the flat out effort in the run blocking. I've never seen a player fail to sustain run blocks at a level like Savainea does. It's really, really hard for me to get past.
One of the biggest things for most positions, but especially box positions, like I call them front 7, front 5s, front 9s, is motor and finish, right? Like, how far are you taking plays? Are you running down plays, offensively or defensively? Are you getting down the field? How often are you not only finishing blocks, but attempting to finish, taking advantage of opportunities? That's why I think a lot of people don't. They'll see pancakes, and those are great, but if you're not hitting a pancake, you're not considered a finisher. But I watch guys, and I'm trying to see, like, when a defender puts themselves in a position to, be knocked down, are you at least attempting? Are you trying to torque? Are you trying to run your feet through that? Are you trying to get that? You might not succeed every time, but are you looking for that finish every single rep? And he graded so low on that scale for me, just because, like I said, I like you said perfectly. I just think he's a great fit for a wide zone team. He has a very good understanding of leverage. He's going to beat guys to the spot more often than not, but he's just not going to be a guy that's going to take you 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 yards downfield. He's not going to be a guy that's going to drive you against the grain or try and put you in the dirt. He's just going to be a guy that wins the leverage battle and hopes the play gets behind him. He's going to be a guy that gets, flipped, creates good rushing lanes, can anchor well in the run and pass, but he's just not going to create massive running lanes. He's just going to create the lane he needs to and hope his teammates can help finish the job for him. And that's why I think he does a good job on the interior at the next level, because he's more of just a role player as a guard. In my opinion, obviously he didn't do that in college, but I think when you see his game and translate it to guard, he's a great guy that if you put between, a solid guard and center, that could be a really strong side of the line for you. But if you put between, a weaker guy at either of those positions, you're going to see a lot of early issues, not necessarily from him, but he's not going to make anybody around him play better. He's just going to, not be a problem for you. And that's, again, I think he's a great early day 3 pick. I think that's where those guys should go. I don't think he's going to improve the level of anyone's offensive line room, floor or ceiling wise. He's just a guy that's going to be in there. If you need a guard, go get him.
And do you want to talk about Ursary as a guard?
Yeah. I mean, really, it's a lot of the same things. I think bigger frame, obviously. I like the arm length better. I think, the measurements might end up being close, but Ursary uses his length a lot better as a tackle, and I think that translates great as a guard. And again, like I said earlier, this isn't necessarily a list of guys I think are guard only. I think Ursary has, guard, tackle, flex. I think he could play either one day 1 for a team that needs a guy at either position. I think he's a guy you can feel comfortable being on the field year 1. But the floor, like if he gets into your organization, and just I think he's got very easy early bust potential. Like I think you get into camp and be like, whoa, what do we have with this guy? But I think you could do that either way. I think you could come into camp and really blow the doors off, or I think you come into camp and be like, man, this is a guy we're going to have to, try and work on for 2 or 3 years, but I don't know if we're going to get to a second contract with this guy. Like, I think that's truly his floor, but his ceiling's also a day one starter that ends up being a long-term starter for a team. And so I think that variability just really scares me. There's a lot of things about his game that I really do like. Again, the way he plays with length, I think he's a better athlete than Sava Inea. I just worry about leverage. I think he plays a little tall. I don't think he has a great understanding of leverage, like I've talked about with some other players. I think there's a lot of times where it feels like he's focused on his one-on-one matchup with a guy and kind of loses the concept that he's running, the scheme that he's running. I think he ends up getting ran into a lot by running backs. He ends up trying to pass guys off when there's no one to really pick that up. Like there's just kind of a lot of weird nuances in his game where it's just like, do you know what's going on? Or is this just kind of like you're just kind of focused on your matchup and then, oh, I think I have help here, but you don't know that you do. And that kind of gets him into trouble at times. Like seeing him work on an island gets you really excited for what he can do in general as an offensive lineman. But then seeing him coordinate, whether it's in a run block situation or picking up stunts, blitzes, handling, being on the man side of, pass protection. There's just a lot of weird things that happen on his film that they kind of make you tilt your head and be like, well, you're a good player, but like, why are you doing that? And so maybe, again, he could get in with a good O-line coach and be a great day one guy for you, or he could get in and just be like, dude, what's going on with you today? But it's like every day. So.
Okay. So at that point, we've covered the guards. Let's pause before we do the tackles. So Parker and Drew are among 42 people that podcast on occasion at the Draft Professor. Drew, you want to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and how they can find you?
Yeah, for sure. My name's Drew. We're at IronCityFilm on Twitter or X, which is where I post pretty much everything, all my scouting reports, a lot of cut-ups. I've been pumping out O-line cut-ups since I've been watching these guys. I've had a lot of scouting reports off on those guys. That's pretty much where I do everything. I'll do some film breakdowns on Dynasty Trading Room or Fantasy Trading Room sometimes, but most of my stuff's mainly just on my Twitter and here at the Draft Professor. Every Tuesday night with Parker or whenever there's an open slide, I try to slide in there like I did with tight ends last week. Or whenever we do the mock drafts on Fridays, the 32 GM mock drafts, which are a ton of fun. Love to get involved with those. I'm always drafting for the Titans in there and whatever teams need a GM. So those are fun. Love to have any of you guys that want to participate in those. Always love to have new faces in there. But yeah, do most of my stuff just on my Twitter at IronCityFilm or here.
Cool. And Parker.
Yeah, I mean, relatively similar. I do a lot of draft content, hopefully. I also talk about the Bengals probably more than I should at times, just, my favorite team. But go find me at Parker Blake 60 on X. That's where I'll post everything. Feel free to subscribe to me there. I do a lot of my in-season and summer scouting stuff all goes to my subscribers. I don't release a lot of that stuff early out just to my regular timeline. It's for my subscribers because I try and keep a lot of my hot takes, especially early on, more private. So if you want to go yell at me about some really bad takes in July, August, September, go subscribe to me on X because you'll see a lot of that stuff pop out. But yeah, everything I do, I post there. I dabble in the YouTube stuff. I dabble in TikTok, but I try and post everything there, the links there to direct people there. Once I kind of get everything ironed out, I'll have everything available everywhere and I'll have all those, tags. But right now, go to my X. That's the stuff that I actually feel confident in. And I'm not still trying to figure out. That's where I post a lot of just my takes during, it's combine week. So I'll be following along. I'll be watching the combine, especially when the O-line goes on, I believe it's Sunday. I'll be talking about what I think, how the drills are going, what I think people should be watching for in specific drills. I tried last year, every time they transition drills, especially for the O-line guys, I talked about hey, watch this drill, but don't just watch for the generic stuff. This is what you should be watching for. These are kind of the points to take away from this on-field drill. And then obviously we'll talk about, measurements and metrics and testing, even though I have certain feelings about that you'll be very well aware of if you just go to my X account. So just go follow me there. I'll post everything there for y'all. So
awesome. I love having both of you guys on the channel. we started together a little bit late, right? Because we didn't like Drew. We met you at the Senior Bowl, or I met you at the Senior Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Parker was at the Senior Bowl, and then you met Parker.
I met Parker at a media.
Then you realized, oh,
yeah, we were on the field.
So no, this is definitely becoming you guys are a really good team. So I want to remind the audience, this channel has daily draft content. This is our second podcast today. So we usually have a podcast at about 7 and 9. Now Parker is closer to the left coast, so this one starts at 10. But generally speaking, we have 2 podcasts every day, 7 and 9. And then on Tuesdays, we just kind of skew that because of time zones. Daily draft content. And as Drew pointed out, every Friday we have a 32 GM mock. So we have fans of 32 teams coming in, and everybody's drafting against you're basically drafting against the field. So you tend to learn way more in a 32 GM mock than you will on a simulator, because it's never perfect as far as like what somebody's board is or how somebody perceives team needs. So you can learn a lot showing up on a Friday, and then you also get really good entertainment like Bill Carroll.
Oh yeah, Bill's awesome.
So I don't know, Parker, were you watching last Friday?
I'm not typically able to watch the mocks. I work Friday nights, unfortunately. Right. I'd love to be involved. Also, I have to say, not to interject myself here, but I'm realizing I talked about pre-show that I definitely missed guys, and I just found 2 guys that I think I made. Tim. I made Jim move guys in the simulator. I didn't put them on my guard list, but Drew's 5 and 6 I definitely have as guards. And didn't.
I think I missed Charles Grant as well on this list, but I don't really want to talk about him anyway. So,
so
that's fair.
This is I'm highly amused because this is our second offensive line show today. So the one that we did at 8:30 was offensive line, and you guys already have your guard lists were different. I can now see that your tackle lists are different. This is going to be a lot of fun. So, Drew, your top 2 tackles are Simmons and Membu. What do you like about them that you have them at 1-2?
Yeah, so this actually ended up a lot closer than I thought it would be. I didn't think Mimbo was going to grade nearly as close to Simmons. I thought he was going to be kind of alone at the top, but it was a lot closer than I thought. I liked Mimbo way more than I thought I would. But Simmons, yeah, he's everything we talked about on our tackle episode. He's such an explosive and fluid athlete. Again, I really hope the knee is not anything lingering and damaging and serious, that he can still return to form as that explosive athlete we saw at Ohio State. I think my one big knock with him is just the outside hand placement. If he can tighten up that hand placement and stop letting guys into his frame so easily, I think that's the one knock I have on him. But like I said, such a great mover. He's a great tracker in space. He tracks second and third level defenders super easily. He's got a really, really solid anchor, even though he's playing at 297 pounds is the playing weight that I've seen the most. So he's you would think, looking at his frame, maybe some play strength issues, but I don't think so at all. He's a mauler in the run game. Didn't really lose to power ever. He's got an accurate punch, well-timed. I wish there was a little bit more pop, but like I said, he's playing kind of light, not a ton of pop in his hands. But he's very technically sound, super light on his feet. He's never going to get beat by an inside counter. He mirrors inside so well. So I think, again, hopefully I don't have very tapped in medical information, but if he leaves this week in Indy with clean medicals, this guy's a top 10 player on my board. I think he should be a top 5 pick in the draft. He's awesome. And Mimbo is awesome, dude. This guy rocks. He's crushing power on down blocks. I would never want to be in the receiving end of an Armand Mimbo down block. He will split guys in 2. Again, one of the few blockers in this whole class that will actually finish his run blocks. I love to see that. He gets after guys. He wants to finish them with an exclamation point. I think Armand Mimbo could reach block the sun if you asked him to. Also, there's not a single thing in the universe Armand Mimbo could not hit the outside shoulder on a reach block with. This guy is who you want in wide zone. He will get after anybody on a reach block. And I know some people have been talking about him as a guard. I don't see it. I think the foot speed, Are there concerns here and there? Maybe, yeah, but I don't think it's near bad enough to kick him inside with how high his potential is at tackle. He's got such a strong punch, really jarring two-hand punch. Not a lot of variance in his punch. He kind of wants to just stick with that two-hand right there. But it works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Plays really balanced, good base, good leverage, good pad level. Pretty advanced hand fighter as well. I think Membo, I think Daniel Jeremiah's had him in the top 15 on the past two mocks. I'd be really surprised to see him fall out of that. And I think it's well deserved. I think he's a day one starter and a guy with really high ceiling at tackle.
And Parker, same two players, Simmons and Membu. You have them at 1-2 for tackles. So what do you like about them?
Yeah, Membu, I agree with Drew 100%. I think he filled the crater that was the 1-2 jump in this tackle group. I probably don't have him as high as it sounds like Drew probably has him on his overall board. But I do like a lot of his game. I do think he's, instead of being the guard that can flex a tackle, he's the tackle that can also play guard for you. But he's a guy that you definitely let fail outside. I don't think he will. I do think it's funny, Drew being the wide zone guy. I'm more of a gap scheme guy personally. But my favorite part about what Membu does on the perimeter isn't necessarily how he's able to reach guys, get to the outside shoulder, because he's a two-handed puncher, which I hate. I think if you would just maximize using that backside arm and get to the front side shoulder, you'd probably be a much more successful reach blocker. However, the power that he's able to generate and the motor he has, he's able to run his feet through blocks. When he gets to the outside shoulder, or even squares up with these guys on the perimeter in a wide zone scheme, the ability he has to take those guys vertically and, again, look for the finish, look to just take this guy home with his own two hands, I think is really what opens up that perimeter for the Missouri rushing attack. Like, he was able to just create wide perimeter rushing lanes and just say, hey, if you want to come outside, that's fine. You can go anywhere you want. And then, like Drew said, he just runs his feet straight through defensive tackles. Looks like he has no intent to block the D tackle in a good way, where he's running to the linebacker through the defensive tackle's shoulder and just the defensive tackle's in his way. And he makes sure that he is no longer in his way after a couple steps. Great upper body strength, great base, great lower half strength. One of the more solid profiles from a natural, athleticism and strength perspective. I don't love kicking him inside because I think he plays a little wide with his hands. I think he can get a little grabby on the outside of shoulders at times, which isn't necessarily too bad as long as he keeps his feet moving, which he does a great job of doing. I just think he can get a little grabby, try and reach at guys, try and bring them closer to his frame, try and use that length in all the wrong ways that I always like to tell my players. But I think his floor is very high. I think his ceiling is very high. He can have positional flexibility for you, but go throw him at tackle. I think this is a great guy. Look, like, just for teams that need more than one offensive lineman, which is most of the league, Membu should be high on your board because you can bring him in and he's going to have a day one impact for a team. I've talked about how much I love Josh Simmons. I don't think he's on that level where he's going to come in and really be a staple for probably a struggling team. But I think if Membu can get into a group that already has a piece or maybe two pieces on their offensive line they feel good about, he's going to just really spike the level of that group. I think, again, a great fit for the Seattle situation, a great fit, for a team like the Panthers who's looking for more youth that they can hit on. What I worry about with him is him going through a situation where he needs to be the staple guy. I don't think he's built for that. I don't think he's the guy that's going to come in and be a franchise, tackle for you. I think he'd be a long-term tackle for you, but I just don't think he's going to be that caliber of player necessarily. But I like what he does. I think he can fit a variety of schemes, though I think he'd be, better in a wide zone look. I worry about what he does as far as being isolated in gap scheme stuff. I just think, again, he gets a little wide. I think you end up with a lot of holding calls from guys trying to knife in on him. But just overall, a great prospect. Again, he bridged the gap, but he didn't eliminate the gap from 1 to 2. But he did a good job of jumping up that list for me. I watched him a lot later. I talked to Drew about that. I got to him late in my film study, and he flew up the board for me.
Fantastic. So, Drew, your next two are Josh Connerly and Anthony Belton. So talk about why you have them at 3 and 4.
For sure. And back to the 32 GM mock drafts, you can tune in every Friday to see me take Josh Connerly at 35 every single week because I think I've done it for the past 3 weeks because they keep letting him fall there. I got to hear what Parker's doing with the Johnny Cornelius at number 3. We didn't talk about this pre-show, That's going to be a tough pill for me to swallow. Parker's going to have to do some 7 on me for that one. But to talk about the other Oregon tackle, Connerly, he's been one of the first guys I watched in this class. He's been one of my guys from that point on. Been one of my favorite guys in this whole process. I love the fast, quick, twitchy, athletic tackles, and that's exactly what Connerly is. Guy that moves like a tight end. He's, one of the more, I don't know that I'd say the most technically advanced with his hands, but he's right up there. Great hand usage. One of the only guys in this class that varies his punch usage. I think that's going to be a really valuable asset to him when he gets to the league. Is that's a thing that guys don't really have at his age or this stage in their careers. He's already, looks like a veteran in that way. I think he's a pretty good run blocker, despite having some play strength concerns. Which kind of gives me hope because there's some major anchor issues. I'm not going to pretend like there aren't. He'll get ran through sometimes the chest, like he did at the Senior Bowl, that infamous rep against Mike Green. But I think he's clearly got some strength in the run game. So I think there's hope for the anchor to improve. And I think he's just got infinite pocket range. He's never going to get beat on the inside of the B gap. He's got such great mirror skills. He's an early second for me, about as early as you can get in the second. And I think he's going to be a guy that has a fluid transition to the league. Oh, and Belton too. I keep forgetting to do back-to-back. Anthony Belton's another guy that I've loved throughout this whole process. He's got such a mean streak. And you can kind of see it on the penalties. There's some issues.
Oh, you go right ahead. I checked that the episode is not for kids on YouTube. So
yeah. But Belton, yeah, he's probably the strongest in this whole class. He can punch a hole through concrete. It's just like he's going to put a hole through somebody's chest. He's a great mover for how big he is too. He's going to get to his spot. He's got some major balance issues, which I don't like. Typically that gets me off of guys, but I like the rest of Belton enough to deal with it. So strong, immovable anchor. The foot speed is not great, but I think he's a good enough raw athlete that can be worked with. And he can get to speed. He has to overset for it. Like he's going to have to fully extend for speed, and he's not going to have the mirror to get back inside if a rusher crosses his face. But again, it's like Mimbo. I don't think it's bad enough to kick him inside. He's just got so much raw power in that frame, so much strength. You can work on the balance issues a little bit. I think this is a long-time starter at tackle too, and I got a second-round grade on him as well.
And then the controversial pick, at least in the chat, is a Johnny Cornelius and then Kelvin Banks, Parker.
Yeah, no, I put Cornelius high for a reason. I came into this wanting to do this sell job. So I think I'm not going to have Cornelius as my tackle 3 on my board, but I wanted to bring this perspective in this conversation. If you look at these Oregon tackles side by side, I mean, very easy to do. They play all of the same games together. But if you watch them, they bring polarizingly different styles of offensive tackle play to the field, which is why I think they played their respective positions. Connerly's going to be the guy that consensus likes better because he's the quick twitch guy. He's the good mover. He's athletic. He wins to his spot. He flies around at the second level. Cornelius is the more physical, less athletic bruiser. Like I think Cornelius, you bump inside could be really fun, but I think you bump him over to right tackle because they were right and left. I have this back. I have this right. I have this right. You bump him over to the right side and you just let him be a bruiser in the run game. I think you're going to get a really high level of play out of him. Now, if you put him in a wide zone scheme, you're going to have some struggles with him on the perimeter. Just leave him bump into the interior and just let it be. But what I think he brings is a high level of finish and a high level of physicality. The technique, the foundation that he has there has a ways to go. I'm not gonna lie about that. That's why he's lower on my board. But why I wanted to put him in this conversation again, I think he brings what Connerly doesn't. I don't think Connerly is a great finisher. I don't think Connerly has great upper body play strength. I think he's got it there in the lower half. I think he moves his feet fine enough as a tackle. I don't think he has range issues. I think he can perform well at the second level. But I think Cornelius is going to be a people mover for you. He's going to relocate defensive ends. He's going to crush defensive tackles. He's going to get in the face of linebackers. And by, the second, third, fourth quarter, they're going to be trying to avoid him when they see him climbing. I just think he kind of brings that demeanor that you'd see with a guard, but he brings it in such a bigger frame, and he's able to still move and eliminate range, from some of these speed rushers on the perimeter with what I feel like is a very strong upper half. Like he gets a hand on you, it could just be a punch and kind of bring that hand back in. Is one of his, I think he likes that move better than most in his pass protection arsenal, where he sets out, kind of gives you a punch on the inside shoulder and then resets and lets you have to gather back to him. I just think he does a great job of hiding the deficiencies in his game, and that's why I wanted to put him higher on this list, because I think it'd be very easy for an offensive line coach or a guy that scouts offensive linemen to say, I see this guy being a great fit in our scheme and for what we're trying to do offensively, and moving him up the board for those reasons. So I just wanted to kind of talk to that point where he'll be lower than a lot of these, maybe not a lot of these guys, but some of these guys on my personal list. But if you have a scheme fit for him, or you're only missing a piece or two on your offensive line, he's a guy that you can bring in. Like, he's a guy that I'd be interested to see the Chiefs take a swing on in maybe the second round, third round, purely because I think you bring him in next to a really solid guard. I think you can get a very, very high level of play out of him. But if you put him into kind of a crumpling unit, he's not going to improve it by himself. I think I talked about that with a couple of these guards. He's not a floor raiser, ceiling raiser on his own. But if you get him into a situation where he can kind of lean on his guard at times, especially with some more exotic looks, I think he's going to be a very high level player. So that's the conversation I wanted to have.
Okay, and then you have Kelvin Banks as well.
Yeah, I have Kelvin Banks at 5. I'm not high on him, but I'm also not stubborn. I can see the upside with him. I do see the pros to his game. He's just not a tackle that I'm going to like personally, but I didn't want to let that affect my ranking of him. My own personal bias plummeted him down my board unrealistically. I tried to keep these semi-realistic, and I figured if I was taking Cornelius to 3 so I could rant about him for a little bit, I had to leave Kelvin Banks a little higher. So, but I definitely see the vision. Big frame. I think he's a decent mover in space. The balance issues just kill me with him. I feel like he's always trying to just grab guys and lean on guys and use that mass, use that, I think, what some people perceive as strength, but really I think is just, kind of what the size he's working with, where he gets hands on and just tries to pressure people around the pocket. I worry what he's going to do against bendier guys. And I know people talk about how he's got film against him. And I think if you watch that film and you come away thinking that he's good against bend, flexibility, and athleticism, then we have to watch the film together so you can show me, because I don't see it. I do think he does a great job on down blocks. I think he does a great job of walling off linebackers. I think he moves fine enough. I think he tests fine for his size this week. But overall, I worry about him on the perimeter in the screen game, which Texas likes to use him quite a bit on. I worry about him with some of these more athletic linebackers that are going to be better at knifing underneath, because I don't think he has great lateral quickness. I think he uses his length a lot to really mitigate that deficiency in his game. He tries to use his hands to cut guys off, which is why people like arm length to tackle. I just prefer more technicians. I like the guys that can move well and understand leverage, where I feel like Kelvin Banks has really just relied on his ability to eat space to be a successful tackle. And I've just seen too many guys go to the league and fail doing that. I've seen a lot of guys succeed. I think, that was one of the reasons I was lower on Darrisaw than consensus, Christian Darrisaw out in Minnesota. And I think I've just accepted that I'm okay missing on those tackles, because I'll go hit on the Josh Simmons style guys, some of the guys we'll talk about later on in this list, but I'm okay missing on some of these big bodies that don't move well in space. Like they're fine. Again, I think he's going to test fine. I think he moves fine. The film looks okay, but when people try and sell me on that he's quick and athletic, I just don't see it. So that's why he slid for me.
Okay, and then Drew, you have Logan Brown and Marcus Bowe at 5 and 6. So what do you like about them that you have them either really high, or you have them on your list and Parker doesn't even have, in the case of Logan Brown? Yeah. Did you have them on your guard list, Parker?
Yeah, Brown and Bowe and Ursery are all guards for me. Like I said, I just missed them. They must not have gotten switched over. But I have them as guards. They're top 175 guards for me. That's where I'm at.
Got it. So Parker, talk about Brown and Bowe.
So for the record, I've got like mid to high second round grades on both these guys. So I love both of these guys. And this is the one where I'm so far like batshit off consensus that it's just like I'm on my own island, then I'm okay with it at this point. Because if I had to pick one, like my guy out of my guys, it's Logan Brown. Bar none, my favorite player in this whole draft class. I could spend 2 hours here alone talking about Logan Brown. I understand why people are hesitant with him. Very small sample size, only 1 year starter at Kansas. Very few true pass sets in that Kansas offense. It was not very translatable. But my God, did he make the most of those true pass sets? This guy is, I would venture to say, probably the most explosive athlete right there with pre-injury Josh Simmons in this whole tackle class, probably this whole offensive line class. And he's fluid as well as being explosive, which is a rare combination for me at offensive tackle that you don't really see that often. He's incredibly advanced with his hand usage, got a great snatch trap, again, which is not something you see for a 1 year starter often. He's got a lot of raw power. He's a bulldozer in the run game. I put out a cut up of him on Twitter this morning. The Kansas State game alone was almost a 2-minute cut up, purely from run block highlights, because he's just clotheslining guys left and right. That was the best, easily my favorite game of film I've watched this entire cycle was him against Kansas State. He's constant bulldozer in the run game. The mirror on him is absolutely unreal. You have zero shot in the world at beating him on an inside counter. He's got infinite pocket range because his feet are so quick. He's got the punch isn't like, it's not a world beater punch. It's not a ton of pop, but it's accurate. It's on time. Good enough, especially for how good of an athlete he is. I just think I don't really understand why consensus is so low other than the lack of sample size. I know there was an altercation at Wisconsin that was like some off-field stuff, but I haven't heard super reliable info on that. So he's my favorite player in this whole draft class, bar none. And Marcus Bowe is not too far behind him. I also love Marcus Bowe. He scares me a little bit more just because he's so weak, just flat. I don't want to come across as too abrasive, but he's just flat out weak. There's major play strength issues there. The anchor is not good at all. I'm terrified for when he runs into an actual NFL power rusher. But he's damn explosive too. And I have no problem saying he's got the best hands in this whole class, the best hand usage, at least. He's got a probably 10-minute long highlight reel of just snatch traps. He's got an awesome snatch trap. He broke out this really cool fake jump set throughout his whole, which again, I don't know how translatable that's going to be in the NFL. It's probably not going to work.
It's translatable. It's a good move.
You think it's going to, for a guy at his size, I think if he tries it and an NFL power rusher sees it on film, they're going to blow a hole through his chest. But I think it's a really cool move. It worked like a charm in college because it throws off their timing so well. It's so cool. He pulled out in Mobile too. He used it there in the one-on-ones. It was super cool to see. But in Bo, I keep forgetting the M silent now. I found that out just before we went live. But he's the hands are so great. He's such an explosive and fluid athlete. He plays really, really low. He's already not a tall guy, so he wins the leverage battle just off that, but he gets even lower than he is. The balance issues scare me, and like I said, the lack of play strength is pretty apparent. That scares me a little bit. I don't know if he's going to succeed full-time at tackle, but I think he's a good enough athlete that you let him fail out there before you kick him inside. But yeah, I love both of those guys. I'm way higher than consensus on both of them, and I'll die planting those flags.
I have questions. Since I didn't get to talk about them, I'll ask you questions.
Shoot.
So the reason I bumped them inside, you kind of touched on this with Brown, but my biggest issue with them is you talk about pocket range. We need to have a more in-depth conversation about that off camera because I'm curious to see how you measure it versus me. But my issue with both of them was I felt like they both tried to do too much, and I feel like they struggle, working in a negative set. Like I feel like they're both higher level run blockers. I love what they can do in the run game. That's why I projected them higher as guard. Again, I put guys at guard, I think that's their better position, not necessarily their only position. I think Logan Brown's a great flex guy. But for me, he's a guard that plays tackle. And for me, Bo's a guard. And it's because of their ability to get into the spot in their pass sets. But not only that, but to work against these speed guys. I feel like Brown at least is going to do fight against power. I think he can meet power with power and kind of stalemate guys in pass protection. Yeah. But I think in Bo, if you get a guy, again, I think Jared Verse is the typical answer. But I love Jared Verse coming out. He's always my frame of reference for edge rushers. I think I want to say the same thing about a couple of guys this year. But I think they're going to eat Bo alive. And I think it's the direction the pass rush is going. So my question is, I felt like they had range issues. I need you to convince me that these guys aren't going to struggle with speed to power on the edge or just straight speed flying off the edge, maybe an inside move, working back to the perimeter, working a contained look from some of these more athletic guys to the next level.
I see that concern much more with Bo. I think it's a very, very real concern with Bo just because he's such, again, the word usage feels bad, but it's frail is almost what comes to mind, where it's like he's playing like a stiff wind could blow him over.
He's a very timid player. I think you could tell that he's not confident against power, and it shows.
So yeah, and it makes sense why if you watch him. So I see that absolutely with Bo. I think he could. And again, I don't know if he works at tackle first. I 100% understand when people kick him inside. I think more people are doing it because of measurements than they are actually watching the tape.
I agree.
But like we said,
100%.
that's a different conversation. But with Brown, I feel like with Brown, he's already such a polished and explosive athlete off of 1 year. There's so much untapped potential on top of that. I don't think he has. There are anchor concerns with him. He didn't really get tested this year as far as anchor goes, but you saw it in the Senior Bowl. Shamar Stewart.
He's very protected in that scheme for sure.
Yeah. Like Shamar Stewart put a hole through his chest a couple times in Mobile. Yeah. The anchor concerns are there, but kind of what I was talking about with Connerly, but to a more exaggerated degree, where you see this guy, there's no play strength issues with Logan Brown. He's killing guys in the run game. So I think the anchor is more of a coaching issue, and I think it's something that can be tapped into when you get to that next level. So I have less concerns about that with Brown, but the Bo concerns are very real. I fully understand that and why people are lower on him and or kick him inside.
I'm super excited to see Brown's measurements. I think if he comes in,
he's going to test out of this world this week.
He got measured in Mobile. I just got to go find him, I'm sure. But he's a guy for me that I need to see the length in measurements because I don't see it on film. I think if he played with better length, and that doesn't mean having longer arms. That means knowing how to use your arms, just to clarify with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But he just doesn't have that on film. That's one of my biggest concerns where, I think he's a good hand fighter, but I don't think he's good. Like if that hand gets knocked down early, I feel like that corner just opens right up. That's one of just my biggest issues with his tapes. Thanks for speaking to that, sir.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was looking, you got through both Brown and Bo, which means that we pivot to Parker. And Parker, you will do Cam Williams and Jalen Travis.
Perfect. It's funny. Cam Williams is Anthony Belton, but more athletic. I think more athletic, less strong. So if you look at Anthony Belton's game and you just think, what would like the alternate dimension Anthony Belton look like? It's Cam Williams, where he's not going to punch a hole through your chest. He's not going to take you on a ride for 15 yards, on the perimeter run game, but he's going to be able to mirror very effectively. He's going to get hands on and keep hands on. And if you knock them off, he's going to replace them very quickly. I think he's very much a technician, but very clearly lacks play strength, which is, I think, why he's become such a great technician. And that's why for a long time, and I think on my final rankings after we finish testing and stuff, Cam Williams will probably finish very close to, if not above, Banks on my board. Just looking side by side, I think Anthony Belton's a great separator for them as far as my tackle list goes. But I think Williams is he's a great run blocking tackle. He's a great quick pass game. I think it fit great in Miami style type guy where he's going to get in the perimeter well. He's going to get to the second level well. He's going to work well in quick sets. But if you're looking for, 5, 7, 9 play action style pass looks, that's where you're going to really run into struggles with him, where once these guys start kind of leaning into their power more, he's going to get moved back. He can anchor. It just takes him a little bit to settle in. I wouldn't say he has anchor issues. I just think he is a lot more conservative with his anchor. He wants to give you a little space and get his hands in a good position before he can out leverage you and then set that anchor. It just doesn't feel like he's very confident in it. But I love the athletic profile. I love what he does in space. I think he's a very patient player. I think he's very good at some of the, more technical stuff that I always look for and that I hope to see my tackles have. I just think the play strength concerns are real for him. And I think he does a good job of covering them up, but I don't know how translatable that ability is. That's why he slid down my board a little bit, but big fan of the player. And again, I think he's been up and down my board. It's been kind of a roller coaster with him, like I talked about with a couple of players throughout this process. But I think he's in a good spot right behind Anthony Belton, wherever Belton ends up.
Okay, and did you do Williams and Travis?
Oh, sorry, I totally missed Jalen Travis. Well, I can't believe how I did. I'm a huge Jalen Travis fan. I've been waiting because there's guys on this list to my left right now that I keep looking at, and I'm like, man, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear Drew's opinions. Anyway,
I can't wait to talk about Holland Pierce.
I know. I'm waiting. I'm like excited. I'm excited to hear. I didn't realize we had him at the same spot. Jalen Travis, massive frame. I've talked about him a lot. I think that's why I kind of glaze over it. But I've talked about him a lot. He's one of my favorite day 3 sleeper type guys. I think he's a great 4th round selection, though I believe he goes much later than that. But great frame, knows how to use it well, plays with good length and has good length, which is a great combination of things. The Holland Hive is real. It is alive.
Yes, it's so real.
Well.
So real.
Jalen Travis's biggest drawbacks are he's not a good mover. He's not an athletic guy. I think he's explosive in his set. I think he wins the spot well. I think he understands the limitations in his game, which is always good to see from a guy, from any prospect. I think when he gets hands-on, he shuts down rushes very early. He has a good understanding of leverage, especially in pass protection. He's like a true left tackle for me. Like Jalen Travis is a guy that I would love to see in KC when they're looking to solidify that tackle spot on both sides with just a high floor guy. I think they keep taking these higher ceiling shots, these more projection style shots. I think Jalen Travis is a day 3 guy they could bring in and could provide a lot more at that position for a team like that than a lot of people think, just because I think his floor is so high. However, I think the ceiling is very limited. He doesn't have a great athletic profile. He's not going to test well, in my opinion. The measurables are great, but he's just not a good mover. I think he's very square, very balanced in his sets. And again, I think he's one of the better pass protectors out of this tackle group. But then you see him move in the run game, and I think he does a good enough job. I think he does a fine job locking, like securing defensive ends or helping on combo blocks with the 3-tech, working to that second level. But I worry about him once he gets into the linebackers. I have zero faith in him as far as moving on perimeter screen style stuff. Just again, a very true, solid left tackle for me, a very impressive pass blocker. But outside of that, there's just a lot of stuff in his game that I don't think he's going to get to. And so if you're a pass heavy team and you're looking for a left tackle, I think he's the way to go. You know what you're going to get out of him as a pass protector, I believe. But as far as beyond that, I don't think he brings a lot to the table, which is why he's a 4th rounder for me.
Yep. So I have a quick Jalen Travis story. So
awesome.
So Parker, really early on in the process, you were one of the original people that I reached out to as I was forming Draft Professor. And there were 12 people. You were in a group of 12 that wanted the podcast. So there was a group I gave offensive tackle to, and Travis was on the first episode. And these 2 podcasters are no longer with us. They're like, Jim, you weren't giving us good players. And like Travis was one of the ones. And I'm like, they were giving the scouting report back. And it was pretty much everything that you just said, Parker. And I'm like, yep, he's going to get drafted. That's a 5th round. That's a 5th round guy.
Correct.
He has all of the measurements. And we might not like some of what we see on film, but an NFL offensive line coach is going to say, we need a tackle. He can play tackle and I can work with him.
He's very much an I can work with him type prospect. That's what I like most about him personally.
Yeah. So like, that was what I heard, right? Like, I wouldn't know if I'm watching the film what I'm seeing, but I can listen to a scouting report and get a reasonable idea of, is the player draftable? So they left the channel because they said I wasn't giving them good players. But yet I think you being able to say here, like, you really like Jalen Travis, I was like, yeah, that's going to be an offensive tackle somebody's going to like on day 3. And it's going to be earlier on day 3 than late. It's not going to be round 6.
Correct.
He's probably going to go around 4 or 5 in a relatively weak offensive tackle class.
Like, so, I know I talk about it all the time, and I know it doesn't matter in like the grand scheme of life, but he's a guy that like I'm probably going to try and grab in the 4th round for my shadow team where I need offensive linemen, I need tackles. But he's a guy that I feel very confident about what his floor is. And again, I'm not an NFL offensive line coach. I'm not even an NCAA D1 offensive line coach, P4 guy. But if you were to tell me as an NFL guy, you were going to give me a Jalen Travis out of the draft on day 3, I'd be very excited. Like, it's very much, I don't want to like say Trey Smith vibes because they don't have very similar offseason profiles at all. But, he's going to be that day 3 guy who, come year 2, 3, 4 in his contract that we're going to be like, wow, and so stole him in the 3rd round, because of XYZ. And I just don't understand how you can hate the floor. I can understand where if you're like looking long term and you're like, oh, we need a guy that's going to project to be a franchise left tackle. I don't know if he's that guy, but if you're looking for a guy, you just need to fill the spot again. You have 2, 3, 4 pieces set on your line and you feel good about them for the long term ish. You bring a Jalen Travis in and he's going to really solidify that room for you, and at least provide a floor, a rising tide, right? Raises all ships. Rising tide raises all ships. I think he's that guy.
Yep. So, and I was doing that just to delay Drew because I know he is chomping at the bit.
I have been waiting this whole thing to talk about Holland Pierce. So, for anybody that was around here, was that 2 weeks ago that we did our offensive tackle podcast?
Correct.
I put together my list, and Jim, give a little shout out to our host here, asked me, there's no Holland Pierce on the list. And I thought, I heard the name, he had big measurements at the Shrine Bowl, but I hadn't heard anybody really mention him. He's probably not even going to make the list. And I didn't watch him before off the tackle list because I got down to some time constraints. And then I get around to watching him for this big board. And I'm kicking myself for not listening to Jim and watching this guy before off the tackle podcast because he rocks. This guy's awesome. And I know he's at OT9 on this list, but it's because it's crowded. He's an early 3rd round pick for me. This guy's going to be my top 75. I love Holland Pierce. So obviously the main selling point, he is 6'8", 350 pounds with, and listen, when I said 37-inch arms on that frame, this guy is a 350-pound pterodactyl at 6'8". And he's DeJuan Jones with longer arms and more athletic. This guy in a class full of tackles, the bigger tackles at least, that cannot move and cannot deal with speed. This guy is 6'8", 350 pounds, and he moves better than probably half the tackles in this class. He's got absurd movement skills for his size. Nobody that big should be able to move like he does. I'm fully with Ryan with his Holland Pierce hype. I love to see how early Ryan was on him. I'm fully with you there. He moves so well. He's a really advanced hand fighter for a guy that's as big as he is as well. I think he's not like, he shouldn't get the raw label at least. I think he's a developed guy. I wish he was, and again, same problem with Deion Walker. I sound like a jackass telling a guy who's 6'8" to get his pad level down, or a guy that's 6'7" to get his pad level down. But it's a little bit worse. You got to sink your hips a little bit coming out of the stance. I think if he could work with that, the leverage issues wouldn't be quite as bad. They're obviously always going to be there. But Pierce, such an incredible athlete. He's going to be like a 9.96 RAS or whatever by the time this is all said and done this week at the combine. My other gripe with him is he puts his head down at contact and lunges into his punches. You're 350 pounds. You don't need extra power. I don't know, why are we putting our head down at 350 damn pounds? So that really irks me. But this guy obviously has an awesome anchor at 350 pounds. Like I said, moves so well. This guy somehow consistently reaches the outside shoulder on reach blocks, even though he has the same measurements as an F350. How are you getting the outside shoulder at 350 pounds? It shouldn't work, but it does. I don't understand why this guy is like 6th round on consensus right now, or like he's in the 7th on PFF's big board. And like this guy is outrageous. He shut Jai Joyner down in the Minnesota game, who was an explosive edge, didn't give up the corner to him. Obviously the pocket range and the foot speed concerns are there. But this guy, he mirrors, like he doesn't lose to inside counters at 350 pounds, which is unreal. He sells out on speed and he still has the mirror to get back inside. So I think this guy has outrageous potential. I would take him on day 2 and not bat an eye. Like I said, I have an early 3rd on him. And it took some restraint to not put him higher than that. So I love Holland Pierce. So upset I didn't watch him before OT episode, but I guess it's better late than never. And then on to Chase Lunt, another guy who I absolutely love, who I kind of doted on in that offensive tackle podcast, but I'll do it again. Lunt, and I posted a cut up of him early this afternoon on the Duke game. This guy gets on reach blocks and gets to the second level like somebody just lit his ass on fire. This guy, and he's a converted tight end. So he obviously has the movement skills, but he moves so quick, easily the most fluid mover of this group. But I think his ceiling is pretty low because he's just not a great. He's obviously a great athlete because he moves so well, but in terms of like the total package, he's not very strong. He's got the same major play strength issues that Bo does. He's the anchor is a real problem. He never really got tested at UConn, but he still kind of got blown through a couple times. He's going to have serious problems with NFL power. Not quite as good of a mover in the run game as you would have liked against UConn competition. But he's a good hand fighter. Not a lot of pop in his punch, but it's accurate. It's well timed. It's technically sound. Got good leverage. He's balanced, like I said. Reach blocks, unreal. They're automatic with him. There's zero question he's going to get the outside shoulder. This guy, he tracks guys at the second level and third level like a DB. I mean, he'll sink his hips and mirror a guy. He never loses somebody in the second level. He's a heat-seeking missile to defenders in space. So, like I said, I think the ceiling's always limited by some strength concerns there. But such a good athlete, and I've got a late third on him as well.
Cool. And then the last player that we haven't talked about yet is Ozzie Trapilo from Boston College. So, Parker, you want to talk about why you have him at 10 on your list?
I would love to, but only after I give Drew props, because I think having Holland Pierce and Kelvin Banks right next to each other on your rankings is accurate. I think Holland Pierce is what everyone thinks Kelvin Banks is.
Yes, right there. Thank you, Parker.
Where he's the athletic guy that has the size, but still has the anchor and has power in his hands. Unlike, I know Drew said not to say this, but I do think Holland Pierce is more of a project. I think the pad level issue is a flexibility issue, not a technique issue. I worry about his ability to bend. Again, those bendier guys around the corner, and kind of all that project stuff that I talked about with some of these other guys all applies to Pierce. I think he's got the traits. I think he's got the ability, but he's just not good to me yet. He's not good yet. Like, I think he's a fine player. I don't think he's a technically refined player. He almost reminds me of Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU a year or two ago, I think last year, where he's got the size, got the athletic ability, but man, it's just like there's technical flaws in his game that you're gonna have to really work out of his system, which is why I have him a little bit lower than Banks. I feel like Banks is a similar player with less athleticism but less technical flaws. But I think Holland Pierce, the player that everyone describes to me as Kelvin Banks, I see as Holland Pierce. So
yes, exactly. And when I say he wasn't a project, I more meant like just the hand fighting. Like, I thought he was pretty technically advanced with the hands. I didn't mean not a project overall.
Yeah.
There's definitely
like I agree with you. I wouldn't call him raw. I just think there's a lot. I think there are a number of issues in his game. Like I have him as a fifth rounder. He was a borderline traits but not good player, but I think he was more not good than his traits could make up for at times, especially against the competition he was seeing. But with these last two players on my board, I have to throw out there a trend that I've noticed over the last 3 years of really diving in and making 300-plus player big boards for my drafting purposes. If you don't have 2 Rutgers players and 2 Boston College players in your top 175 every year, you're not watching the right film. Because I think the last 3 years, I've had at least 2 Rutgers players and at least 2 BC players that go on to be good football players. And they should be top 175 guys. And people just either don't know about them because they didn't watch the teams play, or they're watching certain players on those teams, like 1 or 2 guys. But there needs to be 2 of each in your top 175, I believe. Even if it doesn't feel like it. But I mean, even if you look at last year, we had guys. I mean, I feel like it's every year. I feel like it's every year with these 2 schools.
So
I don't know how it happens.
Just out of curiosity, for Rutgers, do you have 2 or 3 in your top 175?
I think this year I have 3. If I'm remembering names correctly.
I was about to ask then, Monanganai, Pierce,
top 175 guy. Yeah.
And who's the third?
That's what I was because I can see, because I think there's another corner. There's another DB.
Tyrene Powell that high, or
I know what I'm drawing a blank on his name, but there's a DB out of Rutgers.
But Rutgers makes good DBs.
They do
every year.
Well, Max Melton was awesome.
Max Melton's a dog, dude. Like, anyway, Also,
for the record, one last thing on the Banks Pierce debate. Those guys are 0.1 away on my grading scale from each other. It took every ounce of restraint that I have in my body not to put Pierce over Banks just for shock value. Every bit.
Yep. So Ryan just helped us out.
Yes,
with the other
thank you.
Rutgers player. Thank you.
How you not find that name? First off,
I know, like that's the name.
You're not going to watch Longer Beam?
Come on now.
Come on. Anyway, Ozzy Trapilo, Boston College. Has to be a Boston College player. Had to include him in the top 175. Whether or not he deserves to be, because he's going to earn it at some point because he went to Boston College. Have to represent. But no, I like his game. I feel like Ozzy Trapilo is trying to be Jalen Travis, where he is a more true pass protector. He's that true left tackle. I feel like he's plays with good length, has a solid anchor. All the things I said about Jalen Travis. However, I feel like he's not as strong. I feel like he has worse struggles as a run blocker. I feel like he just struggles as a run blocker, period. I feel like he's really sold everything. I feel like Ozzy Trapilo is the definition of what frustrates me with offensive line development nowadays, where it's, hey, how good of a pass protector can we make you before we hand you off to the next guy? We don't even care about run blocking. You'll figure that out as you go. You can really tell that in his game. I feel like he has technical issues in run blocking that you just don't see with other guys. Like, it really truly feels that he spends his off seasons perfecting what he can be as a pass protector, but he just doesn't have some of the more natural traits or some of the development, physically that a Jalen Travis has. But I think Trapilo can kind of work up to that level. But I, again, would just call him Jalen Travis light, where I really like his floor as a pass protector, worry about him as a run blocker. But I have him. I think like I said, I think he's the lowest rated guy of my top. He might be 175 for me. I'm trying to think of where he landed. But he's like right there at the back end of the fifth. I can see people calling him a UDFA, a PFA. But I like what he can bring. I think if you're looking for a tackle, you'd be happy with a Trapilo once the draft's all wrapped up or once the free agency period's over. But he's just not going to really excite you watching him. It's just more, I think, me and the nuance that I like as I watch a lot of offensive line film over the course of a year. There's just things that he does well that other players don't in pass protection. Like, he has a very good understanding of leverage, of timing, of patience, like of all of those like core principles of pass protection. That's something that other players just don't have and don't seem to have a grasp on. But then you switch him into a run blocker, and it's like, oh, well, that's why all these other like niche things of pass protecting, because you've just spent a lot of time doing that. I need you to like figure out how to drop your pads in the run game and run your feet through blocks and X, Y, Z. But I'm a fan of Trapilo because I think he's a true left tackle. I think he's a good pass blocker. But yeah, the issues in the run game are going to be a problem.
See, I'm going against. I preach myself as a purely film, never measurements guy, but I'm not sure I can ever get past 6'8" with 33-inch arms. That is the most bizarre frame of any human. Like 6'8" with 33-inch arms. He's hiked up down here. Like, again, there's stuff I like about his game. I've got like a 4th round grade on him. I don't dislike him, but I cannot get past the bizarre frame. It's hilarious.
In the human making factory, the two Boston College guys in this draft were next to each other, and the machine had a little malfunction, and they gave
Ezeraku's arms hanging down to his ankles
to Ezeraku. And they gave Ezeraku's arm to Trapilo.
Yeah.
Because Ezeraku is 6'2" with 45-inch arms, and Trapilo looks like a T-Rex out there in pass protection. But he's a good technician. He's a very good hand fighter.
Very technical.
He understands leverage. Like, he works with it. Like, he kind of, and this is a dramatic comp, but he reminds me of like why I like the Rashawn Slater, even though he had the short arms, where it's like he knows how to use them. And again, I think he plays with good length, though he has shorter arms. But again, it's hilarious because they play for the same team. So if you just watch a Boston College game, you're like, both of these guys look weird, but in exactly opposite ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, so next week's podcast is going to be body shaming with Parker and
exactly. Yeah, that's the next podcast.
Yeah, we're here. I've already got the list made.
We get combine measurements and we make fun of them.
Oh, this is pretty good, guys. We just covered what
20. I think I had 25
offensive linemen. Right.
That was a lot of offensive line tape recently.
That was well done.
A conversation I had with Drew coming into this week, I was kind of asking him, like, how many guys how many offensive linemen do you have in your top 75? Because I researched a couple boards just to see how dramatically off I was, or if there were just names I needed to watch that I just hadn't found that people had in their top 175. And PFF has 27 offensive linemen in their top 175 on their site as of today. I know that changes over time, but as of recording of this, they have 27, and so I was short of that number, but I wasn't too far off, which made me feel good about myself. I think where you slot these guys positionally can change and has variability, but overall, I think I was around the 23 to 25 range, and I feel like that's a good spot, and I just think that's crazy to think of when you think of just this class and the need at the position. Having sub 30 top 175 offensive linemen, I think just shows what this class is. But I just think there's so much great day 3 value in this class, great PFA value.
Yes.
There's going to be guys that slide to day 3 in this class, slide out of the draft, that are going to end up being contributors over their career as far as offensive linemen go. But it's just a funny class. I just wanted to kind of mention that.
Yeah, so Parker, on that, one of the players I've noticed that we don't talk about a lot at the Draft Professor, but I see them on other simulators. Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon.
Yep.
Have you watched him?
He is on my list for this weekend. I knew he wasn't going to be in my top 175 because I had watched him, like I was talking to Drew about. There's some games that I'll just watch through and just see what players I notice. And he's a guy, when just kind of watching through some games, get a vibe on certain teams, certain players, that he popped. But he's going to be a guy that if he tests well this week, he's going to explode up boards. I think PFF already has him pretty high. I think there are a lot of technical deficiencies in his game. I don't think he's a well-developed player at all. I think he is almost 80-20 traits to technique. He really leans on how he's built and the athleticism he possesses, the natural strength that he has, which are all fine things. But I just worry about long-term, as far as, the first 2-3 years of his career, what he looks like for a team. I think he could very easily be a practice squad guy for a year or two, or a fringe 53 guy for the first 1 or 2 years of his career. And then, start coming into the league and figuring things out. As I've talked about with the process of developing offensive linemen, it takes 2 or 3 years. I think once he gets through that kind of the 3-year grace period that I try and give offensive linemen, he could be a solid player. But I think coming out, I just don't love the prospect.
Yeah, okay. I think Parker, the Crenshaw-Dixon thing. And while we're cramming in last-minute thoughts here, I feel like I should touch on Charles Grant, because he was supposed to be on my guard list, and I don't think I got him switched over in time. He was right above Kandra. And with him being, he was what, in the top 50 in Daniel Jeremiah's last thing, right? That was the big thing. He cracked the top 50 barely. Mm-hmm. I do not understand. That might be my biggest disconnect. And I think Parker's with me here from what we've talked about behind the scenes. I just don't get it. I hated almost every minute of Charles Grant film that I watched. For a guy that is such an explosive mover in a massive frame, he's clearly a great athlete. He's going to test out of this world this week. It's exactly what me and Parker were talking about earlier. How you can be a great athlete, but your pocket range can still be god awful. These are D2, Northern Carolina A&T edge rushers that are killing him on the corner. Because this is a guy that could probably run 4.8s, 4.9s, and he's still getting beat around the end by D3 edge rushers, D2 edge rushers. And for a guy that normally, or what I heard coming into it was that he's throwing around guys like ragdolls on the tape because the competition's bad. I watched the Richmond game, and this dude's getting blown through on the chest.
That Richmond game was bad.
It was awful, flat out terrible. Some Richmond Spider defensive ends over there are putting holes in Charles Grant's chest. It's because he's a hugger. He's got late hands. He's got letting guys into his frame. And if you're letting Richmond defensive ends put holes through your chest because you're letting them into your frame, what's going to happen when you run into Jared Verse? I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the quote was a wide receiver in a guard's body from Parker.
That is exactly what I said.
That was exactly my favorite quote. I think that encompasses everything wrong with Charles Grant.
We'll just move him to a blocking tight end.
Exactly. Yeah. Put Charles Grant at tight end better than anything else he's going to do.
Him and Willie Lampkin.
He's the next. Yes, he's the next. Mercedes Lewis. I guess you can make him Mercedes Lewis.
Mercedes Lewis.
But yeah, I don't get the top 50 hype. I can't get there. I think you take a late day 3 flyer on the athleticism. but I can't get any earlier than that. That Richmond game was awful.
I think that's a great transition to like what I wanted my closing thoughts on this episode to be. I think a lot of people have talked about how a lot of analysts are trying to force QBs into the conversation. They're trying to force this guy to just kind of have some excitement. People are saying like, oh, people are trying to convince you that Jackson Dart's a good quarterback. They're trying to convince you that Tyler Shuck's a good quarterback. Like these guys aren't, but they're just trying to get some excitement because you need good quarterbacks to have exciting, draft conversation, which I agree to a point. I think people care about certain positions. But I think what's been under discussed in this class is like people are doing the same thing with offensive linemen. That's why you see so many guys being projected at weird positions, so many guys just being grabbed, like the Charles Grants. It's like, oh, well, there's this small school guy who's really athletic. So, we're going to talk about XYZ with him. And, like I think that's the biggest thing with Charles Grant is like that was pretty early on when he caught on in the process. What people see with him is they see, oh, he's a pretty good mover. He's athletic. Like that's going to translate. But like we talked about, athleticism doesn't equal good blocker. And like I think people see the RAS scores, RAS scores, and like, oh well, you want to draft high, highly athletic offensive linemen, but you need to apply that. And like I talk about a couple players all the time that they have great, testing numbers, but then you turn on the film, it doesn't show up. And I think Charles Grant's a guy where you see him move around, but I think you're going to be very surprised what he does testing wise. And then again, applying that ability to the field doesn't happen. Like he gets peeled open all the time. He plays very tall. He has inconsistent hands. Like when people are like talking about how good of a player a guy like Grant is, it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, look at who he's playing against. Like this doesn't translate to a level up from where he's at right now. That's not going to translate to the NFL. Like I don't understand. And it's like, we talked about how we're confused on the Campbell hype and the Banks hype. And like, I feel like there's always guys every year that just get the hype and keep the hype. And that's just how it goes, which is fine. That's why we're here. So we can tell you what prospects really look like and disagree with the guys that go on before us because we're smarter anyway.
Exactly.
Right, Drew? Yeah,
exactly.
So he gets it. But no, I've never understood. I watched the Charles Grant film early on because I'm a big advocate for these FCS small school guys when they deserve, the hype that they should get it because it's hard to.
I wanted it to work. I wanted the story.
But you turn on the film, and I found myself watching the left guard more than Grant. I thought the left guard was really damn good.
So pivoting back, like this is one of the reasons that I created the Draft Professor, right? So like Armand Membu, I remember when Jacob and Brian covered him for the first time in October, and they weren't ready to like pound the table for round one. But I was listening to the scouting report, and I'm like, how come nobody's talking about him in like the top 40? Like everything they described to me was an offensive tackle that was going to go high. But they had him, like they had a day 2 grade on him. But they were saying, right now it feels like it's a late day 2. And this is like November. And I'm like, if you ignore the preseason hype, nobody would be surprised where Banks is ranked right now. Right? Like somebody made a decision or a group of people make a decision when they make a big board in June. Mm-hmm. But they only if NFL Stock Exchange only watches 15 guys to give you a top 10 board. Did they ever watch Membu when they were watching Banks for preseason? Right? They may have not watched him.
Were you watching Holland Pierce in May? Come on, guys. What are we doing?
No. Yeah. Nobody except for Ryan. He's a real grinder.
So we will. Well, anyway, so I know next year we're going to be doing more for summer scouting. I'm actually looking forward to what we can do in the summer because we have 42 podcasters at the Draft Professor. And then we got people like Ryan who come on and guest with us once in a while. So, and then Andy, thank you for stopping by. I know that you're in my feed daily. So thank you for stopping by. But we've had a pretty good show, but if we close the show out before we hit the 2-hour mark, we can replay it.
Deal.
So the 2-hour mark, that's a good benchmark. So
there we go.
For the 42 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for Drew, for Parker, for everybody that guests for all of the people that consume the content. You are appreciated. Thank you. And remember, every day can be your draft day if you have the right attitude. We'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow, everybody.
Draft Logan Brown and Holland Pierce.